Yes, it has been a while. Why has it been a while? It's been a while because of this video. Now, I know most of you are going to ask, where's the review video? Hopefully you actually watched the video before you typed in, where's the review video? Review video will be tomorrow. I had a holiday party at work tonight. Was not able to see the pay-per-view, so I will be doing that tomorrow. This video. There is a backstory behind this video. This has taken me weeks and weeks to do. Not because of editing, not because of anything like that. Mainly because I don't care about TNA. I just found that out. I honestly could care less. As the title says, this is an open letter to TNA, the final TNA Rant. I hope it's the final TNA Rant. I hope that will be. I guess we'll have to see on that, but hopefully this is the last one, because really I can't see myself doing another one of these. However, weeks ago, Doug did a video, or Bill and Doug, of course, did a video before Bound for Glory, giving their booking things, how they would have booked Bound for Glory, going into Bound for Glory. Apparently that video was shown to Hulk Hogan or Chris Hoff, I can't remember which, and which in response were said that, they didn't know what they were talking about, this, that, or the other. Doug made a video talking about that. Fool Killer did an article on it, and at that point I told Doug that I would do kind of a video response, and the idea was that I was going to basically do what I've done before, which I was going to go from Bound for Glory, after Bound for Glory, basically however they booked it, and was going to book up to Turning Point. Except when I started doing that, I realized that I really didn't care. Also, I didn't want to take the time, because what I was going to do is I was actually going to go and get the live Impact and time it, so I got all of the segment breakdowns right, so that I basically was just going to use that as a formula and just book all the way to a pay-per-view, all the TV and everything. And then I started trying to do it, and I was like, you know what, why am I even doing this? Because I really don't care. And so instead, I'm just going to rant about TNA for a little bit. I'm just going to say my frustrations with TNA, basically, because I did tell Doug I would do this video. Now, hopefully, Doug has done 2 videos, Bill and Doug have done 2 videos where they said, show this to TNA. If you guys want to show this to TNA, go ahead. It's not why I'm doing this. I just felt like I told him I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. Now, if I don't care, now, I'm what I would call a die-hard pro wrestling fan. I will watch pretty much anything that is pro wrestling. And for me to basically give up on TNA, which is what I've done. I have not watched a TNA, I had not watched a TNA pay-per-view until Bound for Glory. And the only reason I watched Bound for Glory was because one of my friends who I used to watch pay-per-views with, hadn't had a chance to watch pay-per-views with him in a long time. I was actually going to get to watch the pay-per-view with him and have fun and make fun of TNA while I do it. That was the whole point, because I knew that was going to be, because I knew that there was going to be stuff on the show I was not going to enjoy. So there was that. There was also the fact that I knew I wanted to do, or I was going to do this video about, booking from Bound for Glory to Turning Point, and the only way I was going to be able to do that is if I watched Bound for Glory. Didn't pay for Bound for Glory. This first pay-per-view I had watched since I believe, a full pay-per-view I'd watched since lockdown. Not watched a full episode of Impact since lockdown. Really. I've watched parts of Impact. I've not watched a full episode, I don't think. Not that I remember. I don't think I've watched the full, because usually I'll watch the parts I want to watch and then I'll just stop. Motor City Machine Guns, Beer Money stuff would be a great point to that. But again, I'm the very fan that should watch TNA every week. I'm the very fan that should want to at least watch the pay-per-views every pay-per-view, and I don't. There are a whole list, and the huge bloated, and TNA's, I've said this before, TNA's roster is extremely bloated in my opinion, but in their big bloated roster, there's tons of guys that I like to watch put on a pro wrestling match. But I don't like watching them do it in TNA, and I'm not the only one, because all you have to do is look at the house show numbers, which had gotten better, now are getting worse again. It's kind of like, we've seen TNA once, and once was enough. They're having to cancel house shows now because of bad ticket sales off the bat. Pro wrestling is not in a good spot right now, and they're going back to the point where they're doing shows and they're doing house show numbers, and Ring of Honor is yet again, in some markets, doing better than them, and that's ridiculous. And I can guarantee you that, because we saw this before, when TNA used to let their guys wrestle pretty consistently on Ring of Honor shows, Ring of Honor with TNA talent would draw better house shows than TNA would. That tells me that it's not the guys they don't want to see, it's TNA they don't want to see. It's the product that TNA puts on that they don't want to see. This is why TNA can't leave the Impact Zone to put on Impacts. This is why TNA cannot leave the Impact Zone to even do pay-per-views. We've had, 2 pay-per-views outside of the Impact Zone this year, I believe. Lockdown and Bound to Glory. If there was another one, please let me know. But I think those are the only 2. And you have to ask, why is that? This company has spent all this money on all this talent that they brought in, and it has failed, and it has failed miserably. And yet, the problems with TNA are problems that have continued on with TNA. They make the same mistakes over and over and over again. They can't seem to make their own stars, even though they get ample opportunity to make their own stars. You had Monty Brown. Monty Brown was over with the fans. People wanted to see Monty Brown as champion. People wanted to see Monty Brown as the first kind of face of TNA. And for whatever reason, TNA decided they weren't going to pull the trigger. And, that's too bad, because I really think that if they would have given him the championship, or given him a, at least a good feud for the championship, and not teased fans about it, it would have helped the company. It would have helped the company at a time when the company was in a much better spot than it is now. When the company was, doing 30 to 40,000 buys a month and not sub 10,000, which has been reported. That's just bad. Unless you bring in, the ECW guys and you do a one-time ECW show and it does 20,000 buys. All of that, this is when you were hot. And that's when fans, in my opinion, I noticed that's when fans started to kind of lose, some momentum in TNA at the time. But then you had Samoa Joe at the same time. And people were like, well, there's still Samoa Joe. And so people waited on Samoa Joe, and the same thing happened. Yeah, eventually Samoa Joe got the championship, but it was too late. People were like, oh, it's, that ship had sailed. One of the reasons for that is because you brought in Kurt Angle, and you basically put Kurt Angle in the spot it seemed like Joe was going to be in, which was fine at the time, except that you put Kurt Angle over Joe in the very first feud you had them in, which I personally feel you did too fast, but that's beside the point. But, which is another continuous problem with TNA, is every time a WWE superstar comes in, well, we have to put him over, the TNA guys, the TNA named guys, the guys that, were made in TNA. Wrong. You should have had Joe go over Kurt Angle the first time. If you wanted to have a 3-match series, fine, but Joe should have came out the better of that series. I've never understood that. I will never understand why that happened. And then you waited too long for, TNA to give, TNA waited too long to give him the title. By the time you did, the luster was off. On top of that, he was booked in a horrible champion. His championship reign was booked horribly. The first time you gave him you should have said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make him a strong champion. Okay, that's beside the point. But, again, you made the same mistake twice. And you continually put WWE guys that people see as WWE guys, over guys who are seen as TNA guys. And it amazes me, because the fans, that's not what the fans want. It's evident that's not the fans want, because most of the time the fans get upset every time they see that. missed opportunities. You had a missed opportunity with LAX. LAX was a great stable. And even when Conan left, they were still hot, and yet you weren't able to do anything with them. You weren't able to be creative with them. That should have been your key. That, you know what, maybe we need somebody who is better creative, because here's somebody that's making us money with merchandise and whatnot, and yet we can't keep them hot because one guy left. You know, is that creative's fault? But there could have been a better job. It seemed like as soon as Conan left, LAX just kind of fell off the map. Much the same way with the Beautiful People. Beautiful People debut, knockout. You know, the Knockouts division happens. The Beautiful People become the prime, heels of the Knockouts division. Why is that? Because they were seen as the divas of the Knockouts division. They were seen as the WWE divas, kind of invading the Knockouts division, and because of that, they were over. But now you got it to where the Knockouts division looks like the Divas division, so now the Beautiful People have lost their luster. On top of that, when you had a chance after you were forced to break them up to bring them back together, which is one of the hottest gimmicks you've ever had, you just went, oh, we're not going to do that. We're going to swerve the fans, and we're going to turn one of them face and keep one of them heel, and not put together one of, the best stables we've ever had when we really need to. Again, missed opportunities over and over and over again. And then at Bound for Glory. Bound for Glory, we had this big revelation that them was basically Immortal with Jeff Hardy turning heel. And Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan, and basically the NWO angle in TNA for the umpteenth time. I say the umpteenth time. Really, it's probably the third or fourth. But if you go back and look, well, let's see, we had Sports Entertainment Extreme. That was an NWO-like angle. We had the Kings of Wrestling, another, more of like outsider NWO type angle. We had the Main Event Mafia, which many fans saw as an NWO type angle. We had the Band, which again, NWO type angle. And then we had Immortal, NWO type angle. And the thought, I guess, which, and every time it's failed, every time it hasn't worked, but again, this time it was going to work, because this time we were going to turn Jeff Hardy. Because it was going to be similar to when we turned Hulk Hogan. And that's fine, except that misses the point on why the NWO worked. Why the NWO worked? For two reasons. Because A, you had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash who were cool and did cool things like do semi-shoots on, TV, which no one did at the time. Not the case now, but no one did at that time. And on top of that, you had Hulk Hogan turning heel, which you had an entire generation of pro wrestling fans that had never seen Hulk Hogan as a heel. Hulk Hogan turning heel was a big deal. On top of that, the fans were bored of Hulk Hogan. Most WCW fans at the time were booing Hogan. That's something people forget. He was getting booed all the time anyways. So they decided to turn him heel. And it was a big deal because, wow, Hulk Hogan's heel. That's a big freaking deal. You had these other two guys who were cool, which brought legitimacy to the fact that Hulk Hogan was cool now. And you basically spun the NWO angle around that. You don't have that with Immortal. You have Hulk Hogan, yay. You have Jeff Hardy, who is, yay, a heel, who, Jeff Hardy is Jeff Hardy. I mean, that's what he is. He's not Hulk Hogan. He doesn't have the charisma of Hulk Hogan. He doesn't have the presence of Hulk Hogan. He basically just has his little, his fan base. And his fan base is going to cheer him no matter what. It's not like Hulk Hogan. It's not the same type of circumstances that led to the NWO angle. People, I don't get it. It's like the people that run TNA, who were around during that time, during the NWO angle, during the Attitude Era, during all of that stuff, they seem like they live in a different world, or they have an extremely different perception of what happened during that time, of why the NWO angle worked, why it didn't work. They seem to have this weird of why WCW failed and why it shouldn't have failed. And it's because we keep seeing them do the same things, like, oh, well, this should have worked at the end of WCW, and it didn't. Well, if it didn't, and you keep trying, and it still doesn't work, that means it doesn't work, and you need to do something else. You need to go back to basics, which is another point with Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe. That's me my final point. Pro wrestling right now is not in the best of shape. The biggest reason why it's not in the best of shape is because of MMA. MMA has hurt pro wrestling in a pretty big degree. And one of the reasons why that is because pro wrestlers don't seem like badasses anymore. Because if you're a really badass, you would be in MMA. There's two exceptions to that mainstream North American pro wrestling. Two. Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle. TNA has both of these guys. If you have the only two guys, there's nobody in the WWE right now that anyone would see as a badass, I don't think. Maybe The Undertaker, but probably not in his current shape. So you have these two guys that fans can, see as badasses. Illusion, not illusion, whatever. Illusion is pro wrestling. Pro wrestling is illusion is a big part of pro wrestling. People see that. People want to believe that they're badasses. Why would you not build your company around these two guys? Why wouldn't these two guys be your smaller scale, but Steve Austin and The Rock? Why wouldn't they be that? Why wouldn't you build your entire promotion around them? Either they're feuding, either they're not feuding, or, that everything pretty much is built around this rivalry. And you call it a rivalry, not a feud, but a rivalry between who is better, Samoa Joe or Kurt Angle. And you build a rivalry around that. And you make it seem real. And you make it seem like, when they go for a championship, this is awesome. And you make it seem like, so that if either of these guys are your champion, people believe that they are the best wrestler in the world. I know a lot of people in TNA go, oh, that doesn't mean squat. Bullshit. It doesn't mean squat. Let me explain to you why I think that. Because I can remember when Taz, 5'9" of Taz, back in the ECW days, every ECW fan, almost a lot of pro wrestling fans that knew about ECW, firmly believed Taz was one of the baddest mofos on the planet, and that if he walked into a WWE or WCW ring, he could hold his own, should have a world championship on either one. Forget the realities, but that's what people saw. That was what people perceived. That was one of Paul Heyman's greatest things he could do, is he made people believe that, yes, he didn't have the stars, but he had the better wrestlers. People believed that first, the Eliminators, who everyone forgets, was the best tag team in the world. Then people believed the Dudleys were the best tag team in the world. People believed the late Mike Awesome was that. He was awesome, and when he was world champion, people were like, oh my god, this guy is a legit badass. This guy is awesome. This guy is better than anything in WWE or WCW. TNA has two legit guys that could be that right now, and in Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle, and yet you don't seem to understand that, and you don't see that perception. You don't understand that the way that fans perceive things, and that is a huge flaw in TNA. Such a huge flaw. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating as a fan to watch, because it's like, do you not get what we want? Do you not get what we see? But because we can see it, why can't you see it? It's just mind-boggling to me that a company with this much talent, because without a doubt, I watch wrestling from all over the world. In my opinion, TNA has the most talented their roster, and it's said time and time again, top to bottom, cannot be touched. And yet, in the grand scheme of things in pro wrestling, what are they? The 6th, maybe? Biggest promotion in the world? Maybe? I mean, that's a sad state of affairs for a company that has this much talent. They should be better. And that's the other thing, is the fans think TNA should be better, and when it's not, it's hard to get behind a company that you continuously fail, you continuously not be as good as you think it should be, and there's no reason for it not to be. The money's there, the TV deal's there, the pay-per-views are there, whatever. But, a year ago, the internet was talking about Turning Point and Final Resolution. Forget the fact that the current brain trust in TNA didn't give two craps about Final Resolution, but the internet did. And I understand that people in TNA probably believe the brain trust that as the internet fans, who cares? Well, let's see who cares. If you're doing less than 10,000 buys on a pay-per-view, then maybe you should care. when Dragon Gate, that's doing, you know, pay-per-views that are taped 2 months later, are doing 5,000 buys, then maybe you should care, because apparently they're willing to buy those. Yes, there's all sorts of, you know, there's pirating going on, but people are willing to buy those, but they're not willing to buy your product. I know fans that, yes, they pirate WWE shows, they pirate everything. But honestly, if a show is good and they think the show is good and they're hyped about a show, they are willing to buy it. Definitely willing to buy it. People are willing to buy, you know, UFC shows, and, you know, they're expensive, but they're willing to buy those. Why? Because people feel like they're getting their money's worth. People feel like they're getting their excitement. Now, I will say this. If anybody in TNA truly feels that they cannot put on a show that is better, that is hands down better, that when fans watch it compared to a UFC show, people go, "Oh my God, I should order, you know, this is better." At least think this is better than a UFC show. If you have people in TNA that don't believe that, they need to be fired. They should have been fired yesterday. Because, you know, there's no reason why a pro wrestling show should not be better than an MMA show. MMA has the things that it can do. It has the excitement, it has the unpredictability, it has all of those. But at the same time, you can have bad fights. You can have fights that go to the ground that are boring to a lot of fans. You have, you know, you can have unexciting fights. Pro wrestling, you don't have that. Pro wrestling, you have exciting, and you can have this, and you can have, you know, storylines that, you know, you don't have to kind of make up and try to push a storyline down people's throats for an MMA match, you know, or for a pro wrestling match like you do with an MMA match, and like a boxing match, you know, and a one-sided ass-kicking in MMA for 3 to 5 rounds, you know, that doesn't, you know, end in a knockout or a submission is boring. Unlike boxing, for example, where you can have a 12-round slaughter that doesn't end in a knockout or a stoppage, and it's entertaining because you're watching a guy that is not because you're watching him get beat up, because you're watching a guy with so much skill and so that you're just like, wow, this guy is awesome. That's something MMA can't do. It's something you can do in pro wrestling. There's lots of things you can do in pro wrestling that MMA can't do, and you know, whenever I hear that oh, well, we can't compete with MMA, you know, anyone in the pro wrestling business that thinks that needs to get out of the pro wrestling business, in my opinion. But that's another rant for another time. But yeah, TNA should be far better. They continually make the same mistakes. They don't learn from history. They don't learn from the history of WCW. They don't learn from the history of WWE. They don't learn from the history of anybody. They don't even learn from their own history. They don't learn from their history from 2 months ago. And that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't care about TNA, and why. Alright, I'm not one of these people, but why people who know better firmly believe that TNA should go away, should be dead, should go, you know, that pro wrestling as a business would be better without TNA in it. That is a mind-boggling statement, and the fact that there are people who know better and should know better, even think that, even have that in their brains, should tell TNA that there is something majorly wrong with their product. It needs to be completely overhauled and needs to change yesterday. I'm out.